Hello and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today. To introduce myself, my name's Helen Nicholson and I'm the Alumni Relations Officer at St Anne's College. And I'm really pleased to be speaking to a wonderful panel of people today. And we'll be discussing St Anne's alumna Devaki Jain's recent memoir called The Brass Notebook. So the discussion today will be a dialogue co-hosted between St Anne's College and also the Oxford Centre for Life Writing, where we'll be taking the opportunity to speak with Devaki about writing her book, but also more broadly about her life and experiences as well. So without further ado, I'll introduce our panel. So as I've mentioned, Devaki Jain is a St Anne's alumna, but also honorary fellow of the college. She's an economist, a feminist writer, and was previously a lecturer at the University of Delhi. She's a recipient of the Padma Bhushan, an honour title by the Government of India. And over the course of her career, she's founded a wide range of institutions. She was founder director of the Institute of Social Studies Trust. She was also a founding member of the Indian Association for Women's Studies and founded the Development Alternatives with Women for a New Era. Throughout her wonderful career, she's been the author of many books and essays related to women with special reference to their economic growth. And her most recent book is her memoir, which we'll be speaking about today, called The Brass Notebook, which was published in autumn last year. The second person on our panel is Elleke Boehmer, who is Professor of World Literature in the English faculty at Oxford. She's also Director of the Oxford Centre for Life Writing at Wolfson College. She's a founding figure in the field of post-colonial and world literature studies in English. And her recent works include Post-Colonial Poetics, Indian Arrivals, as well as the fiction To the Volcano and The Shouting in the Dark. In 2019, Elleke was made Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and Fellow of the Royal Historical Society. And last but not least, our final panelist is Caroline Wallis, who is an MBA candidate at Oxford Saïd Business School. She's also the NCR Women's Officer at St Anne's College. And she's a writer and former contributor to Dwell magazine and also the Los Angeles Times. I'll now pass over to Elleke, who'll be able to talk to you a little bit more about Devaki.
Thanks very, very much, Helen, for getting us going. And thanks very much to St Anne's for hosting this panel. We're going to spend about an hour, perhaps a little under an hour, talking about this remarkable and important book, Devaki Jain's memoir. And we are so privileged, and it's such a pleasure to have the author herself and the subject of this book, Devaki, here with us to explore some of the dimensions of writing this book and of living her life, trying to capture that remarkable life in a memoir. So Devaki, you are very, very welcome, and we hope that we can kind of, you know, as they used to say in story circle at school, we're going to kind of cluster together and have a great chat about this book. It's going to be so interesting, I think, to explore in how it was that you actually tackled this journey that you've been on, and how you wrote it up, and just to capture, or just to sort of, you know, capture in words, I think the importance of what you've done. I'd like to read from the back flap of the book, from a leading Indian feminist, and I believe also, you know, a friend and comrade who has written about this book and about Devaki's life work. Devaki Jain, and this is Ramila Tharpar. She has written, Devaki Jain was among those who initiated Indian women into recognizing their rights in society and in asserting a visible presence, discarding their earlier imposed visibility. When such a woman writes, interleaving her public and personal life, then what she says has to say is not just a memoir, it is an event. So that event is what we're going to talk about today. So Devaki, thank you for being with us. Just to start us off, and I'm delighted that Caroline from the younger generation is joining us in this conversation. Just to start us off, I wondered if you just wanted to say a few words about how you approached this. I mean, did it feel like a mountain to climb when in 2016 or so you first began to tackle this book, or did it flow as if you were telling a story to your children?
Alas, Elleke, it was really tough. It was like climbing over stones. And if you remember, I was looking for you, and I cannot help telling others here the story that when I wanted to write this, I didn't really want to write it. But there was a person who still is there. He's the president of the Ford Foundation. And he meets a lot of people because everybody comes to New York for UN and so on. And somewhere somebody had told him, you must make this woman, before she dies, write her story. So he gave me an appointment, said, you must write your story. I said, I will not, because it's what do you write? People write such egotistical biographies. But before I could say Devaki Jain, he had sent $100,000 to the Ford Foundation office in Bangalore and said, make her write it. So I was caught. And then the the government closed all foreign donations. So I came to Oxford by accident, in the sense that Oxford was that's where I graduated, but I didn't know enough people. But then I was given the name of Elleke, and it started. And I must tell you that when I looked for Elleke, I went to her OCLW workshop. And of course, they were all young people, and I was the only white-haired old woman there. So they were looking at me, what I was doing there. So I said to them, you're writing about dead people. They found it very disgusting. But in a way, I felt that if we could write while we're alive, I think it's a much more valuable thing than having so many people dig into books to find out how that person was. Anyway, I dug into many books and finally found that I couldn't find a way out. And then Elleke helped me to find a way out. And here is the book, for which I'm grateful to OCLW, to the college, and to my college.
Thanks, Devaki.
You were asking.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that story, that memory of where it all began is very evocative, because it takes me back to that moment when I think we were sitting in my office, and I simply asked you to tell me a bit about yourself, because that was what the book would eventually capture, a bit about yourself. And you began to touch on a scene here and a vignette there and an anecdote over there. And I rapidly began to see that yours had been a multi-layered life with so many involvements, commitments, inputs, contributions to society, in addition to which you had been a daughter, a wife, and a mother. So I rapidly gained a sense of the enormity of your life, and therefore the enormity of what it would be to put this in a book. In a sense, we needed many volumes, and managed, and it's an extraordinary achievement, in addition to everything else you've achieved, an extraordinary achievement that you've managed to fit it all in here. So just on the practical side, do you remember what it was? Were there particular, I mean, for other aspiring writers and memoirists that I'm sure will be watching this in the future, were there particular moments when it, as it were, all came together? Was there a thread that you found, be it in your childhood or in your marriage or in your work, that kind of allowed you to fit it all together? I'm fascinated.
I must confess that is a very good question you asked. But the book was a story of fumbling and tripping and falling and fumbling. I could not visualize it, and I could not really grasp what I was trying to say. So your question is a good one, and I think people in future who are writing their own memoirs should address that first. But you did give me the clues which started it, Elleke, and since people are going to hear this, I want to acknowledge your, not only contribution, but the knock you gave me. You said start at the beginning. You know how I didn't want to start at the beginning because I had read so many autobiographies of colleagues of mine in India. And I found it unbelievable. People saying, I went to this college, I came first, I got a fellowship, I went to the next college, I came first. It seemed a whole string of showing off, if to use a local word. And I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. But then you said start at the beginning. So that's when it struck me that starting with my mother, my father, my dancing, my horse riding, which did not have any kind of ego boost, might be the better way of starting it. So I didn't go into career or college. Then to pick up what was most exciting for my life, that's when I started to talk about Oxford, which had been a defining moment. And then, of course, my work with women. And the amazing luck I had was that in some sense, that moment in history when I lived from the age of 30 to say 70, so many things were happening in what were called the colonies. So the South Commission, and then meeting Fidel Castro and all those things I never imagined would happen. But by your persuading me to write this memoir, I could at least show that it was possible for a feminist, at that time, a younger woman, to break through some of these powerful citadels and learn from them and write about them. So that's where your encouragement was most helpful, Elleke.
Oh, thank you, Devaki. I mean, as I was saying, it was an amazing story that clearly just, in a way, it just needed to be put down. But and the challenge was how to do that and do justice to the complexity and the layeredness of your life. There's another aspect which that complexity points to. And that is that your life, as you were just saying, has been in some ways both a model, as in you were, a leading feminist at a time when the world was changing. We were moving from, as you were saying, from a late colonial into a post-colonial world when those former colonies achieved independence. And, you were a model and a leading figure at that time, but you were also at the same time a breaker of stereotypes, with your horse riding as a young woman. And when you were a student at St. Anne's, you explored, you had interesting and challenging conversations with men and with women about a whole range of very radical topics. You were a seeker and a quester. So you were both a kind of example in your life, across your life, and you were a breaker of molds. And in the course of that, of kind of managing that, you also, of course, suffered as a human being. So, I wonder if you could just sort of spend a few moments, Devaki, just telling us about, what it was like to be you in those days, those sun-dappled days.
All of us must remember. It's a very nice way of doing it. I don't know. When I read and I think about that part of my life, I cannot explain it. I seem to have had some kind of wild courage, just getting on with whatever the risk was. imagine coming to Oxford without having an admission, going to Ruskin College and getting some entry, then going home and coming back. But remember, coming back was a very painful experience, which I've written about. I came back as an assistant to a famous economist who really had wanted me as a 22-year-old girl for sexual pleasures. So that was a real shock, and it really took me nearly a year or two to get over it. So there are these challenges. Anyway, fortunately for me, and that's where I bow my head to St. Anne's, that the big ones, the principal, the vice principal, Peter Adey, Iris Murdoch, all of them without question gave me admission. I have no idea why they did that, to tell you the truth. I had not passed any exam here, though I had a BA from India and I had a diploma from Ruskin College. But I think the news had gone round that the man who employed me had assaulted me. And I think somewhere there was a sympathy that this woman has been, hurt, and she's come to Oxford. And I came on a fare that he paid, and then he wanted me to return the fare after doing what he did. So I think somewhere the rumor had gone. I think I would say it was Paul Streeton who may have told Peter Adey, look, she's been hurt. And then they all welcomed me to join St. Anne's. And that was the most wonderful, the best thing that happened to me in my life. Let me say it now, since we are talking about the memoir, the getting into St. Anne's and meeting these three dons were remarkable. And Peter and I became lifelong friends because she was also into development. And Iris, as you know, adopted me and funded me and visited me in Delhi. So it was more than just tutor and student. It became a home for me. So that's how I feel my life took off from there.
That's so beautifully painted. Caroline, perhaps you'd like to come in there as we're talking about youth and and St. Anne's in the days of being a student and being mentored by wonderful people.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say it's an honor and privilege to be able to speak with you, Devaki. Your story was very inspiring to me, and it's wonderful to hear about the transformation you experienced at St. Anne's, and I relate to that. I was curious, I mean, since you touched on how your time at St. Anne's changed you, maybe what was, or maybe a few of the biggest things you learned, and if you also wanted to change on how, or touch on how Oxford has changed since you went to school here.
Mm.
Definitely there is a very strong impact that being at St. Anne's, I don't want to make myself into a pathetic figure, but I was a pathetic figure. Pathetic in the sense I had no money at all and had to, Miss Reeves had me to pick up 40 pounds from somewhere, 200 pounds from somewhere. Finally, Iris just funded 1 year. So you can imagine there was this woman who was trying to get money to finish her course. So there were lots of bumps and experiences which were not nice. But the brilliant part was that the students of St. Anne's and the faculty and the space just wrapped me up in love. I must mention here a remarkable woman called Rose Dugdale. You might have heard of her. She was actually the president of the JCR when I was there. And you might have heard of her that she joined the Irish Rebellion and was jailed. And recently, I think she died also. People like that were there, you know, people who came out from, she was what you call a debutante. And then she turned out to be a revolutionary. So you can see what happens. You can transform yourself because of where you are. There were others who have remained lifelong friends. I must mention Pippa Sanford, who was Pippa Norrington, with whom my friendship still continues. When I come to Oxford, I stay with her. So those bonds were made in such a wonderful atmosphere. I don't know if students today get the same nest which we had, because maybe we were smaller as a group, but we nested very quickly and we had lifelong friendships. We are more than just friendships, which is hospitality, which is adoption as if you're the part of the family. maybe because it's become big now, you don't have it so much. But remember, very small groups in each college. So that was something I'm very excited about. And as I said, I don't know how it is now. You should tell me. But it was a great place to fly off from. And there are friends I made then who still are my friends. And there's a man called Stephen Lukes who used to be at Balliol College, who became a great political theorist. Mm-hmm. And he's written about that experience of how he met me and what it was like for a young man from Balliol to meet an Indian girl. And we went dancing at one of the balls that you have in there. So I don't think the space was as big as it is now. So there was much more opportunity for close friendships, I think. But you should tell me.
What really strikes me, both from what you've been saying in response to Caroline's question and from what you've written in the book, Devaki, is that there were these very strong, as you say, nurturing relationships, which I also remember actually from being a student at Oxford in the late 80s going into the 90s. Those very strong nesting, nurturing friendships and mentorships. And what is so striking about the book, one of the elements in this regard, is that some of those relationships were woman to woman. As in your mentorship that you enjoyed with the great philosopher Iris Murdoch. That is very interesting and worth thinking about, because what you were doing there clearly, and there are other examples in the book, is kind of setting aside the rivalry and the competition between women that certainly in that era was often actually encouraged by, if you like, a patriarchal society. Setting that to one side in order to nurture one another in a reciprocal way, and that was such an important part of also your feminism, the feminist economics that you then later developed in India, which was all about looking at other women and, as it were, seeing their economic predicament from their point of view, how it was to be them. So I was wondering if you'd like to reflect a little more on, perhaps just starting with how you remember the great Iris Murdoch and perhaps some of your conversations with her, and what it was to bond with her and to be encouraged and mentored by her.
I do not know if I can give an answer which would really be satisfactory, but they were all so affectionate. I don't know whether other students received the same affection and caring. Perhaps they did. But Iris, I think, found me particularly interesting because I think she was always interested in Indian philosophy. Now, I didn't know nothing about Indian philosophy, but still somehow that attraction to an Indian. She was very interested in Hinduism, and I was not a practicing Hindu. But I think more importantly, our conversations during tutorials was such that it went into existentialism and went to Hinduism and Buddhism and things like that, which took us away from, let us say, the narrow course. And so it rolled out that way. I cannot find any other explanation for the enormous love that we had for each other, because that went on for many, many decades after that. And she visited me in Delhi and so forth. But Iris, I think, was the most exciting of our tutors, but I would not like to say less about Peter Addy, who many of you may not know, that she was also engaged with international development. She was not just a tutor of economics in Oxford. She belonged to many of the international trade forums, which were challenging the European domination over trade in, for example, she was in the cocoa board, and she explained how the cocoa being harvested in Ghana was being completely exploited by the British Cocoa Board and the prices to the farmers. So you had real life people, tutors who also had their hands and feet in society. I think that makes a very big difference to, when you're being taught by somebody who's also got a hand on activism of some kind. So that was a very important part of the education. And we know all about Jennifer Hart, how political she was. So we were lucky. I don't know whether the students today in Oxford have similar tutors who are so also political and also professionally brilliant. I think we were lucky. Three tutors were all very there and here.
Perhaps it was also because, of course, St. Anne's, pardon me if this is incorrect, but St. Anne's would have been a woman-only college at that time. Am I right in thinking that, Devaki, were all the students women?
Yes, yes.
So maybe that has something to do with what we're talking about. Not that I'm implying we need to turn back the clock, but I'm sure that sense of female solidarity and, as you just said, to have one's feet firmly planted in the world as well as in the academy. I'm sure that had something to do with a community of women, a community of equals, as it were, collaborating together, and thinking through problems to do with women and women's bodies. I mean that's another brilliant aspect of the book, that you always remind us, and I say this as a feminist myself, you remind us so importantly of what it is to bear a female body in this world, and yet to be a leading intellectual and theorist and so on, and you capture beautifully and also painfully. I mean, it's often, I think it's important to say it's often a difficult read because there's some difficult experiences that you touch on. But that the female body, and this is still so much the case in India and many other countries today, including Britain, there have been, renewed debates about women's safety out on the streets. To bear a female body is to be exposed and exposable in ways that male academics and thinkers never experience, or men in general never experience. I don't know if this is this something that you related to as a woman's officer, Caroline?
Did you want to say something, Helen, or shall I?
Oh, go ahead, Devaki.
No, look, things have changed so much now. There's many more networks and societies which give some amount of protection, if not the healing touch to this kind of attacks on the female body. Though many of my friends who have read the book have said to me in India that they've all experienced this kind of domestic rape that I experienced with my uncle. It's a very common thing, I'm told, all over the world. So I'm not sure what I'm trying to do. Many of my friends, and here I have no hesitation in quoting Gloria, who's been my friend, Steinem, from when I was 25 or so. So we've been friends for decades. She encouraged me to write about my uncle's rape. I wasn't planning to write it because my family didn't want me to write it. They said it'll hurt his children who are still alive, our cousins, if you put him down there like that. So for years I wouldn't write that. But then Gloria said, you must, because this is such an important experience for young girls, that is rape within their family. And why you must write it is because you've come out of it and people see you as a successful, self-confident woman. So there's a moral there that you can be injured like that as a child, but you can come out and be a person. That was such an interesting explanation and piece of advice that Gloria gave me. That write it. She had been asking me to write it for the last 2 decades, but finally in the book I wrote it. And though one of his children is still alive, most of his children have died and he is gone. But my own family, my sisters and my brothers totally disapproved of that. They said it's not right. to mention it. That's what inhibits many people from mentioning it, because it blemishes the family. And family is such an important structure. I think many societies, and in India, it's the core of your life, the family. But I did write it because I felt that so many others had had that experience. And of course, as Elleke is often said, bouncing out of it and being such a happy, self-confident woman who had her own wonderful, free life and married and had enjoyed her sex life is also important, that it hasn't damaged my sense of self, nor made me abhorrent to sex. So it's also to show that you can get out of it. I think that is where Elleke played a very important role.
Caroline, did you want to come in with a question a moment ago? Was it related to that, or shall I respond?
Yeah.
Please respond. Yeah, we can circle back to my question.
No. Okay. I mean that is well. I mean, I'm processing what you just said, Devaki. I think it is one of the things that I suppose as a reader, you know, and I was both, as it were, a mentor of this book and a reader as it was being written, and then a reader now, you know, when we have the finished book. So I often feel that I'm sort of, you know, a variety of different selves reading the book, but all of those reading selves are struck by some of the very painful moments, for example, the one that you just touched on, but then also the moments of, you know, of kind of, you know, that D.H. Lawrence thing of, you know, look, we have come through, you know, and I think the book is really full of, and those are very, very important moments too, both the suffering and the coming through, really beautifully, powerfully evoked in the book. I was wondering, looking back now at the process of writing, what are the moments that really stand out? What are the things that you are, in a way, you know, most happy to have captured in the book? The standout moments.
A very good question, Elleke. You made me think about something I didn't think about, but that's a very good question. Surprisingly, you are responsible for it. So I'm happy to say to you, you know, when people ask you to write your story, they expect you to write about your achievements. Oh, you were the member of the South Commission, you met Fidel Castro, you worked with Mandela. You know, it's a kind of all the various crowns that you wear. But actually, you were the one who said, write about your childhood, write about what you enjoyed. So, you know, I wrote about horse riding and dancing and all those things. And in a way, that is what has been very helpful in having the book accepted by Indians who are not necessarily radical. You may enjoy it, especially Helen, you may enjoy it also, that so many elderly men, when I say elderly, I mean 50 to 70-year-old civil servants living in South India like Tamil Nadu, Kerala, have written such beautiful letters to me saying how much they enjoyed the book. I'm baffled because I thought they may not like a book of this kind. But I think they find that there's a way in which I was able to bring out, which are very female issues, you know, that is girlhood and things like that. And also, as you can see, I look traditional. I have not transformed myself into what is considered the image of a modern feminist. So I think they find that very reassuring, which is also important. We have to reassure them that we are not going to bite. But Elleke, I want to mention one thing, and that is, I think this idea of writing a memoir, which you encouraged me to do, requires much more training and understanding of how to write it. I fumbled a great deal. I took 4 years and went up and down. And you were there, but you were also sometimes busy. But it's true that if I could, I would try to rewrite it again a different way.
No.
But thank you. I mean, it's good that it is made some kind of impression. So
But I think one of the, to my eye, you know, and being both subjective and objective, I think one of the things that's really well done about the book, and that may be why it speaks to so many different audiences, as you've been telling us, is that you structure it around, you know, these kind of standout scenes, these moments in time. I think T.S. Eliot spoke of life as, you know, as a pattern of timeless moments. And I think that's what you beautifully capture, these standout moments from across the arc of your life. I remember us talking about that, how to balance the moment, the single scene, with the progression of a life, any life. We move from one day to another, but then there are these standout moments. And I think you capture that very, very beautifully, both the standout moments of your political activist life, your professional life as an economist, meeting Castro, you know, being in South Africa with your husband as a, you know, he was the diplomat representing India, meeting Mandela, those big public moments, but then also these private moments. They're like windows in the book into your life, and they very much, I think, draw the reader in. And that may explain this very puzzling fact, I agree with you, of why these Indian civil servants, these you know, retired civil servants, these gentlemen, find so much in the book. Caroline, do you have a standout moment or two from your reading of the book that you'd like to share?
Well, there were many. I wanted to actually touch on something you were saying, Elleke, about, you know, these windows, these private experiences. And I think that was another thing that I think makes this memoir so expansive, is touching on female marginalization in so many different parts of life and so many different types of marginalization. And we see that through your own experiences, your private moments, as well as through your own research, your own work, especially the field research you did as part of the Indian Cooperative Union, where you were interviewing many like female rural workers. And we see female marginalization in, you know, a social context, a economic one. So you talk about inequality within inequality in informal economies, political marginalization, and sexual is a big part, and sort of like maybe understudied, overlooked part of female marginalization in a lot of feminist. I don't know if I can go that far, but we need so many women throughout the book, including your own family, including the women you interview. And I was wondering, like, if there was maybe a particular interview that stayed with you, and why.
That last sentence, I couldn't get the last sentence.
If there was a particular interview or maybe story that stuck with you as you wrote this book.
No, I thought about that because Elleke had also asked, you know, when writing the book, it would have been wonderful if I had got at some root or some moment, which then could have been the center from which one spins out the story, but I couldn't find anything easily. But in some sense, you know, Caroline, life just rolled out without too much planning, but you could say some of it was luck, some of it, and I look back, is unqualified courage. I mean, I don't want to say it looks so disgusting and immodest for me to say this, but we are being truthful now. You're asking me questions about how it happened. So I have to be truthful and tell you, I must have had incredible courage, because I just plunged into everything. Like when I didn't have money to pay, I went and washed dishes in the restaurant that was called Kevinter's or something like that. And then, you know, I'm a Hindu and we don't eat meat, but I ate beef. I even ate raw beef. I smoked, I drank. I just did whatever was in the plate in front of me as long as I could get what I wanted to get, which was to get my degree at Oxford. And yet earn enough to pay my boarding and the tuition. So I'm so thrilled that Oxford allowed me to do that. I mean, if I owe something to Oxford, it is giving me all these little lights through which I could make this life. Can you imagine if I hadn't? I can't imagine it, because I still think of Oxford as my second home. It may be strange to you living in Delhi, but I've visited it every year for the last 10 years. I'm very grateful to St. Anne's. They gave me honorary fellowships, but they also made me have accommodation whenever I wanted. So St. Anne's kept their arms around me for quite some time. And that also was extremely enabling for my love for St. Anne's. And I have friends of lifelong. And then Elleke enabled me to have a Wolfson fellowship. And Wolfson has been very good to me after that. So in some sense, Oxford holds England for me. That's my home, away from home. And I have friends there with whom I can stay and things like that. So what is it all about? I mean, when you ask me, it gave me some strength, and it gave me also a place from which to fly off. So Oxford did give me that jump, both the lived experience and the education. That is the actual tutorials and the learning of the study. But I had many bumps. But I'm grateful that the bumps didn't scar me, but I could continue to be a person who enjoys being alive and writing more than anything else.
That very much comes through in the book and in the writing, that you are a person who enjoys being alive. Devaki, the life force that jumps off these pages is something phenomenal, and I'm sure there'll be many more readers from here in who will experience that and enjoy it. We're coming towards the end of our time, Devaki. It's been so wonderful talking to you. Every time we talk about the book and about your life, I discover new things that I didn't know before, or I hadn't thought about in quite that way. And as you were saying, we've been talking for about 5 years. You know, what a pleasure. Thinking now of wrapping up, you know, you've described in the book how through these experiences, through your wild courage, you became a champion of equality and of rights for women, especially in India, your home country. And looking back, and this I suppose is my last question. Looking back at this amazing life that you've led, and that you've now written up in the brass notebook, what are you most proud of? What is the thing that really stands out for you? As you know, this is a big question, I know. As the achievements that you would want to be remembered by?
Wow, that's a very difficult question, Elleke, because anything one says looks very self-promoting, and I have no such ideas that I have something which people will remember me by. That kind of question I'm not able to handle at all. I know that I have no regrets, that I've enjoyed my life. And I think I stumbled, but then I got there. Everything that happened to me was miraculous. The man I loved and married, my children. So in some ways, it's been a lucky life. And I feel bad to say that, because so many people don't have that. And how do you say, look, I had a lucky life when others are struggling with so much violence against them, or poverty or whatever? But there it is, I got away with it. And then, of course, I must acknowledge you, Elleke, and St. Anne's again and again before we end this conversation, that it is these enabling places and hands that has made me what I am. So we cannot forget that. And if we forget that, then there's nothing else for me to say. So I see St. Anne's as a second home. I see Oxford as a second home. And your encouragement and the encouragement of others around me. So, and most of all, I already mentioned it once, but I must mention it again, that the Ford Foundation's grant, again done by this, what I call him always a wild man, Darren, president of the Ford Foundation, he just took it upon himself to push me to write this. Otherwise, I can assure you I would never have written it. I mean, putting money on my back and asking me to go to Oxford to do it. So, though I've already acknowledged him in the beginning, but Elleke and Darren, I acknowledge you both, and St. Anne's again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devaki. Thank you for those warm and kind words. And I think what that very much illustrates, as does your book, as does your life's work, is the importance of women working together in community and through collaboration with open hearts. I think that your book, this wonderful brass notebook, testifies to that. And it's been a great privilege talking to you about the book and sharing with Caroline as the women's representative of the MCR and the voice of the younger generation. Thank you so much. Thank you to St. Anne's for hosting this conversation, to Helen in the alumni office. And I'd like to wish everybody a good day and also a great read of the Brass Notebook, which is going to be translated into at least 5 Indian languages.
It is.
Well done, Devaki. Thank you.
Co-publisher in England, but we might find that otherwise it's still very expensive to buy it on Amazon, but it'll happen.
Fingers crossed. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, Devaki. Thanks, Helen.
Elleke, is it